Hello, and welcome back to the Punt Intended podcast, a Dynasty fantasy basketball podcast and a sports ethos production presented by FanDuel. As always, I am your host, Mark C., the Dynasty leader over here at Sports Ethos. On today's episode, we'll discuss just why exercising patience in Dynasty is crucial to maintaining the health of your Dynasty roster, and how Voices of Reason can assist in that. Then we'll dive into Ajay Mitchell's rise in the early part of this season and why his drive game can really power his fantasy outcomes. Then we'll look at Devin Vassell and why his game has stagnated, not just in terms of fantasy, but his on court game, and why managers should probably not have too much long term faith in him in terms of being a very impactful fantasy contributor. Lastly, we'll finish off with some observations that I've had this week after fully diving in on the Toronto Raptors. Before we get into all that, a little bit of housekeeping. You can find me over on Blue Sky at Mark C Sports Ethos and on Twitter at MacAttack145. My writings and rankings can be found at sportsethos.com with an NBA Fantasy Pass subscription. Later this week, I'll have my next Dynasty Check-In article coming out where I kind of take some mulligans on players who have drastically, for the most part, drastically outplayed my expectations for them, and I've been pleasantly surprised by. And yeah, I kind of want to maybe hit a little undo button on my rankings of them. And I'll dive through multitudes of players there. So be on the lookout for that. Be sure to read that again with an NBA Fantasy Pass subscription. But let's get into our topic of the day. And it's really just talking about exercising patience with our Dynasty rosters. Even though we're 1 month roughly into the season now, it is very easy to overreact to these samples. And I know, I stress these are small samples. We have to keep the long term picture in mind. But it's also really easy to buy into the hype on a lot of these players or flayed players who haven't performed to expectations. I had someone in our subscriber Discord a few weeks ago ask about dropping Reed Shepard, who, was kind of struggling a little bit early in the season, for Josh Minot, whose star was shooting way upward early in the season, getting those starters minutes, looking like a impactful defender and a capable enough offensive player. Look, I appreciated Minot's rise early, and we all knew Reed Shepard was struggling a little bit early on. But you have to keep in mind there's a reason you rostered Reed Shepard and valued him that highly in the first place. And we all spend months and months, maybe even years, evaluating some of these players on our rosters and making calls on players, making judgments on them, and just evaluating what they can be and projecting them forward into the future. Do we really want even just these few weeks of data to dramatically shift our thoughts and opinions on them? There's certainly data that can shift thoughts and opinions, but it would take an overwhelming amount of evidence or really just something extremely stark to massively shift our opinions on these players. And if you said in the offseason, yeah, I think I'm going to drop Reed Shepard for Josh Minot or trade Reed Shepard away and get Josh Minot back, you would have been called crazy. He would have been like, what are you thinking doing that? And again, this isn't commenting on the individual talent of the players. Yes, Josh Minot's minutes have dropped recently, but I still think there's some clear fantasy potential there. And obviously, Reed Shepard's shooting has stayed hot, and he's making deflections. So, of course, it looks silly now. And in fact, that same manager came back a few days ago and said, hey, Mark, thanks for just talking to me about it and not talking him off the ledge in terms of dropping Reed Shepard for Josh Minot, but just being that voice of reason and stressing, hey, exhibit patience. There's a reason why we roster Reed Shepard. And while Josh Minot is looking good in these areas, it's still obviously not on the level of Reed Shepard. Because so much would have to change. As I stressed earlier, so much would have to change with these players to make that switch make any sense. And so, yeah, he said it. I'm glad you talked me out of that because he was willing to pull the trigger on that move. And now, obviously, a few weeks later, he's like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm very glad I kept Reed Shepard because look what changed with that 2 additional weeks of data. I would say now opinions on Reed Shepard and Josh Minot are closer to what they were in the offseason. And that kind of makes sense, right? Look at those small samples. In 2 weeks, a lot of things can happen. Players can get hot. Players have those emergencies of rotation. Or players can get cold. Players miss shots, maybe are dealing with injuries, maybe aren't playing up to expectations. And it makes you start wanting to question every evaluation you made on every player on your roster. We have to rein those tendencies in as dynasty managers. And we have to keep in mind that, yeah, there's a reason we made our initial evaluations. We have a lot more data, evidence, film than just these, even this month of data, really. And I'm maybe preaching to myself here as well. I am someone who can be very indecisive when pulling the trigger on trades or deliberating back and forth. I hem and haw on trades so much. I will talk to myself about the pros and the cons on car rides with my wife running errands or just going out. If there's a trade in my inbox that I am very conflicted on, I will just spew out the pros and cons of the trade, saying, oh, well, this player's been hot, but he could have this, and this is his contract, and this could happen. But what if this happens, or what if this situation happens? And my wife, I see in my peripheral vision, it's going like, yeah, sure. Oh, yeah, I can see that. Yeah, sure, of course, that makes sense. And I'm not saying she doesn't know ball. She knows ball, but not at the dynasty sickle level that I know ball, or I'll put all these hours into this. And so, just if you're in a league with me and I leave you on read for a trade, it's probably because I'm deliberating on it so much. And so what I stress to myself and to other managers is, yeah, have those voices of reason that you can just talk things out with, or even just sounding boards that you can go back and forth with managers on. That can be managers in your league that you trust to have these conversations with. It can be other people just who are involved in basketball. It can even be, your partner, your spouse, or whoever, just even as a sounding board, just to sound things out, and you end up coming to a conclusion that makes sense for you. And you end up reaching a logical conclusion just by taking that time to really think and dwell on your moves and trades. It can be our subscriber Discord. I cannot tell you how many questions, even just a week or a day, that I answer, that other analysts at Sports Ethos answer in our subscriber Discord. Should you add, drop player Y, player X? Should I make these trades? How should I evaluate my roster? Or hey, Brandon Williams had a rough game and D'Angelo Russell had a good game. Should I make this move? Some of these questions may be more redraft based. Some of them are dynasty based, though. And there's still been a good amount of questions dynasty based that I discussed with managers, and we try to come to not a consensus, but say, hey, here's where the thinking is on these players. And you act as those sounding boards. You have those voices of reason that you can trust having these conversations with, and maybe just talk things out and come to, I don't want to say a conclusion, but come to a place that you feel comfortable with the moves you're making. And I do this myself. There are plenty of people in the dynasty community that I will talk trades with because I get conflicted too, and I'm not even fully sure. I recently, in one of my leagues, I had a recent trade that I was considering extremely hard. This was trading away Domantas Sabonis for Cam Johnson and Naz Reid in a 30-team dynasty salary league. I was like, yeah, the depth would be nice. But, I'm obviously losing a very singular, impactful fantasy player in Domantas Sabonis. But then I started, I was like, okay, yeah, Sabonis is struggling. Maybe I'm getting ahead of some aging fall off cliff. And yeah, Cam Johnson is struggling, but maybe it's injury. Maybe I'm buying low on Cam Johnson. Maybe I'm buying low on Naz Reid. And so I'm like, yeah, maybe this is a good trade. Maybe it does help my team a lot. Maybe I'm not crazy. But to kind of check myself and not be too caught up in the moment of Domantas Sabonis struggling and maybe wanting to take this chance to, I'm going to buy low on Cam Johnson. I'm going to get ahead of this before everyone else is. I talked to a trusted manager in that league, and they were like, yeah, no, Mark, you're being crazy. It's 2 weeks. Yeah, Sabonis is struggling, but we know what he can do when he produces. Cam Johnson and Naz Reid, yeah, it's good depth, but they aren't going to match that. That's not going to be worth it. And then I was like, yeah, you're right. Like, why am I considering this? I am overreacting to this small sample. And now, a few weeks later, with Sabonis looking a little bit more like himself and scoring better and getting a little bit more assists, I'm pretty happy I didn't make that trade. So, yeah, this is where these voices of reason can just help ground you a little bit. Whether you need someone to say, hey, I'm really in on this rookie, and it's like, hey, it's a rookie, let's give it a little bit more time. Or bemoaning a player's substandard play, as I was doing with Sabonis, and I was trying to be, I guess, too big brain, try to get ahead of an aging curve that probably didn't fully exist yet. And I had someone talk me down on that. Have those voices of reason and exhibit patience with your rosters. I'm not saying not to take in new data from this season and adjust opinions, because we should definitely do that. And maybe it sounds like I'm talking, both sides here a little bit. And, hey, you just told us not to overreact. Now you're telling us to react to new data. There's obviously a balance with this, right? There's rarely a black and white answer. This is definitely it's a little bit of both answer. Take in the new data, adjust opinions, but know where things can fluctuate in small sample sizes and know where some stats maybe do indicate that there's either a talent drop off or a talent gain. And at the end of the day, make this season, you can weigh this season's results a little more heavily in your analysis, but they are a small portion of the larger story of a player analysis. This month of the season is not the only portion of a player story and analysis that we have on them. We have pre-draft scouting. We have, for some players, years and years of data that could suggest otherwise. Or maybe we have to factor in this small sample, hey, something's up with the team context. Maybe this player is returning from injury, and that's a very clear Occam's razor explanation for substandard play. I mean, yeah, that could probably be the case with Cam Johnson, who looks to be out with injury now. Is that, hey, maybe he's actually just injured, and that's a pretty clear explanation for playing worse, not necessarily age. Domantas Sabonis himself was recovering from injury, came back. Hey, yeah, maybe there's probably going to be some age-related decline shortly for Sabonis, but not to the extent that he was underperforming early on. And let's look at the injury maybe as that source and trying to be clever and get ahead of something. Reed Shepherd and Josh Minott, we talked earlier. Yeah, Josh Minott looked great to start the season, and then the offense kind of tailed off a little bit. Some of the fouling was a little bit present, and then Joe Mazzulla turned to Jordan Walsh, kind of a somewhat similar profile player, just to see, hey, maybe Walsh can show something similar. And Jordan Walsh now is the one that's looking good. So, yeah, and you look at Reed Shepherd, who's now, he's scorching hitting his threes, and he's making plays. Maybe he just needed adjustment with the Rocket system and coming off the bench and working within those rotations a little bit. These sorts of things can happen in small sample sizes, which is why I always stress exhibit patience with your dynasty rosters. Again, I'm not saying don't incorporate this new data, but keep in mind that this month of play is a part of the larger story. And that's what you got to keep in mind. It is fun to say, I identify this rookie or this rookie's breaking out. I want to get in on the action before he does even better. But at the same time, make sure we balance it out with what we know about a player and the whole overall story. With that, let's now get into a player that maybe we're overreacting to, but I don't think so, in Ajay Mitchell. And yeah, I mean, we could say, well, Ajay Mitchell is just starting the season hot, right? Could definitely be the case. But I think there's lots of reasons to suggest that Ajay Mitchell is actually just doing extremely well right now, and that this can definitely continue in the long run for him. So I'm just adjusting the screens here. We should be good to go. So, thing with Ajay Mitchell, is that in his first season, he showed some interesting scoring flashes, some interesting drive aspects. But he's taken that to another level this season. As a reminder, I am going to be sharing some stats on YouTube here. So if you're watching on YouTube and you like what you're seeing, go ahead and hit that like button. If you're listening on audio, I'll be sure to read out the stats as I'm talking about them. And if you know, whatever podcast platform you're listening to, if you can subscribe, you could rate, review, that sort of stuff really does help the growth of the podcast and would be very much appreciated. But anyway, back to Ajay Mitchell here. His drive game has taken that extra step up this season. Per NBA.com, you can look at player drive stats. And Ajay Mitchell is doing extremely well in this aspect, averaging about 12.9 drives a game, which is towards the top of the league. And on these drives, he's taken about 6.5 field goal attempts per game, hitting these shots at a 48% clip, which are both pretty strong, not just for a guard, but actually for most any player. And to be clear, Ajay Mitchell is a guard. He's not a smaller guard. He is pretty compact and pretty strong, but he is a guard. And you normally see these smaller players struggle with these sorts of drives and these sorts of shot creation stuff. But Mitchell is doing an extremely good job at this aspect right now. Better yet, he's not turning the ball over that much on these drives, about a 5.5% turnover rate on these drives, which is actually extremely good. So yeah, you see that drive volume. And you have to keep in mind, too, that he's doing this in 28 minutes per game. Some of the other players that we can compare him to are doing this in more minutes per game. So if we were to look at his drives per minute basis, he'd actually look even more impressive. So let's take off the filter on Ajay Mitchell here. You can see, of course, Zion Williamson is going to lead the league, 19 drives per game. Cade Cunningham, 19 drives per game as well, but in 37 minutes. Shea, about 19 drives a game, but in 34 minutes per game. Where does Ajay Mitchell's 12.9 line up? I mean, it's roughly, we go about halfway down, but this is like 20th, 25th in the league in drives per game in just 28 minutes per game. And a lot of players around him are averaging a few more minutes per game. So you can see where this sort of drive volume is really stacking up well amongst comparables in the league and frankly looking better. We can look at the field goal percentage on those drives. I mentioned Ajay Mitchell, about 48% on 6.5 field goal attempts on drives per game. Look at someone like Paolo Banchero, who is you constantly hear talked about as this strong driving force to the rim and can score at will. He's taking about 6.1 field goal attempts on his drives, hitting about 47% of those shots. Ajay Mitchell has more field goal attempts and a better field goal percentage than Paolo Banchero on drives to the rim. Very impressive here from Ajay Mitchell. And I'm using Paolo Banchero as an example. There are some players that look a little better, a little worse than Ajay Mitchell. But the point is that Ajay Mitchell is doing this at a high volume, a high rate, and is doing pretty well on these drives to the rim. So Paolo Banchero is more just an analog. He's doing okay on his drives. But Ajay Mitchell is really maybe not standing out, but he is towards the top of the league when looking at his drives per game. And it's really powering a lot of the rest of his game. And we can just look now at his individual stats. I mean, yeah, his minutes are up, but his field goal attempts are also pretty up. Assists up. Points up. And of course, I'm doing that thing where I'm just looking at the per game stats. And of course, since Ajay Mitchell has seen about 12 more minutes per game, yeah, of course he's going to have more stats. Let's do what we discussed on last week's pod. Let's look at those per possession stats now, just to see where Mitchell's up this game. And it's pretty clear that Mitchell is just doing more on a per possession basis. Field goal attempts have spiked way up. 3-point attempts spiked way up. 2-point attempts per 100 possessions have spiked way up. Free throw attempts have spiked way up. Everything across the board has spiked up for Ajay Mitchell on a per possession basis, which is something that I just love seeing, and that is a clear sign of growth here. And what's even better is that we talked about the flaws of using per possession stats last week, right? Notably, if you use it on a per possession basis, when players play more minutes per game, then maybe we see those per possession stats go down just because energy per game, or if players are playing against backup units rather than starting units, then a player may not be as effective. That isn't the case for Ajay Mitchell. He is, even though he's seeing a greater offensive load and a greater responsibility on the team, he's actually upped his game across the entire board. The only area of Mitchell's game that you could say has really dropped off is the field goal percentage from the field. He averaged about 49.5% from the field last season, about 46% this season. But when you are taking more shots, a greater part of scouting reports for the defense and a greater part of the offense, your field goal percentage is most likely going to drop off. The fact still remains that Ajay Mitchell is taking on this greater offensive load and really thriving with this usage. When we talked about his drives to the rim, let's look at this shot chart here per Basketball Reference. There's a lot of shots around the rim for Ajay Mitchell, which is something you love seeing from a guard of his stature. Having that ability to get to the rim and get really one of the best looks in the game that you can get. Rim attempts. Rim attempts are great indicators. And look at his shot percentage at the rim here. In his roughly, 13 games, he is 27 of 38 on shots at the rim. Good for a 71% finishing percentage. That is a fantastic ratio for a guard. His floater range, so this short mid-range game between shots that are taken between 3 to 10 feet. He's shooting 49% on these attempts. These are excellent numbers for a guard. They rank him per cleaning the glass at about like the 75th, 80th percentile for guards. Ajay Mitchell is excelling on getting to the basket, and he is doing extremely well on making these shots. And the best part is, as mentioned earlier, he's doing this with a greater offensive load. His usage percentage per Basketball Reference last year was 16%. This year it's up to 25%. And 25% is you are a pretty key part of the offense in your minutes. And even better, even though Ajay Mitchell's usage percentage has increased dramatically, his turnover rate has actually dipped down from about 13% last season to 10% this season. Again, normally when a player increases their involvement in the offense, if anything, their turnover rate goes up because they're taking on more difficult tasks when scoring the ball. And that's why we also see their field goal percentage normally drop off as well when you see usage percentage increase. Just because if you're doing more things on ball, you're probably doing harder things on ball. So it makes sense. Yeah, you see, usage goes up, turnovers go down, field goal percentage goes down. But that hasn't been the case for Ajay Mitchell. He is showing all of these signs of positive growth elements. All these blues clues littered around are showing clear talent improvements for Ajay Mitchell. So you will take this field goal percentage drop off slightly because Mitchell is just doing so much more with the more minutes and showing so much more positive signs. Really notable too, with aiding the idea that he's just getting to the rim at a hefty volume, is his free throw attempts. His free throw attempts per 100 possessions have gone from about 3 last season to 6.5 per 100 possessions this season. 6.5 free throw attempts per 100 possessions. Yeah, it's not league leading, but it's a very robust total for a guard. And he's hitting these free throws at a 92% clip. That is a huge boost to your free throw percentage. So now Ajay Mitchell is a player who's getting you good points, getting you pretty good efficiency considering his shot diet, getting to the line a good amount and helping that category. And all these drives to the rim and him being this threatening attack in the basket is also opening up his passing avenues. We've seen his assists rise from 14% to 21% this season. And yeah, it's not an amazing passing percentage. I don't think Ajay Mitchell is a fantastic passer, but he's certainly a capable one. And you know what helps passing windows open up? It's threatening the basket, getting to the rim, and you're going to find easy passes that way. So, really, when Ajay Mitchell, I thought he was just okay last season, frankly, but he is definitely turning my opinion pretty 180 on him. I identified the Thunder. If the Thunder had one weakness, if I had to say one weakness they had, it was kind of on ball shot creation. Obviously, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander is fantastic at it. Jalen Williams is pretty good at it. But then no one else was really stepping up in that mold. I thought Nikola Topic would take over the reins this season on that. I thought he might supplant AJ Mitchell. But injuries and off-court reasons for Nikola Topic had made that not the case. Obviously, hoping a speedy recovery for him. But honestly, it seems like this is AJ Mitchell's job now as one of the other main shot generators on this team with what he's shown so far and how he stepped up into this role. Of course, maybe some opportunities drop back down once Jalen Williams returns to the team because it's Jalen Williams. Obviously, he's going to take some of these on-ball reps. But still, even with him back in the fold, the Thunder could still use this sort of generation, shot creation, and drive ability to the basket. And because of that, AJ Mitchell should still have this role on the team. And he's been trusted with this role. And I don't really see it. I mean, yeah, the minutes probably drop off a little bit, but I don't see it. I don't see his role dropping off too much. I think you can trust him now as a pretty solid scoring guard with capable creation. And that's basically my projection outlook on AJ Mitchell going forward, which makes him, I think, a pretty big dynasty riser for me. I think for most within the dynasty community. Let's shift to a player now who hasn't really taken those additional steps forward in this game, in Devin Vassell. No, he looked to be on the rise after receiving his rookie contract extension, roughly, I believe that was 2 or 3 seasons ago. You can see in his third and fourth seasons here, no, really his fourth season is where he spiked. Averaged, 19 and a half points per game, handful of assists, handful of boards, some steals, pretty good efficiency too, hitting good mid-rangers, getting good rise on his jumpers. I thought he was poised to step up his game a little bit further, maybe that creation a little bit further, and really then just become this more nails mid-range shooter. But if anything, in the past 2 seasons, Devin Vassell hasn't just plateaued or stagnated, he's actually declined in his game. So let's look at the reasons why is this the case, though. Because, again, it's easy to look at the overall numbers and say, well, scoring's down, assists are down, field goal percentage is down. I mean, yeah, this just seems like a worse player. Yes, he is a worse fantasy player. But why is that the case? Let's go back to those per 100 possession basis numbers. The first thing that stands out is, the points per game are down from his peak of about 28 to just 20 points per 100 possessions. And of course, part of that is because his field goal attempts and his efficiency from the field are down. He's shooting 40% from the field this season, which is, it's not great. That's not great, Bob. That's pretty damaging. And it's interesting. You look at the 3-point percentage and the 2-point percentage. They've actually been pretty steady in his career, shooting about between 36 and 38% from behind the arc, from 2 points. Yeah, 2-point percentage, he's had a notable dip. 54% at his peak, but down to 48%. But the reason why his field goal percentage has dropped off so dramatically is look at the share of 3-point attempts and 2-point attempts. This season, Devin Vassell is actually averaging the most 3-point attempts per 100 possessions of his career with about 11 and a half, which is actually a really good volume for a shooter. The shooting actually looks pretty good there. Good, really good 3-point attempt volume. Pretty, that's about average from deep, a little above average. You take that volume with above average shooting. The problem is the proportion of his shots that are 2-point attempts, and that has ticked dramatically down from about 13 2-point attempts per 100 possessions at his peak down to just 6.6 2-point attempts per 100 possessions. So, of course, if you're taking more of these threes and less of these more efficient twos, you're going to see your field goal percentage fall off at a pretty stark rate. And whenever I watch the Spurs, I remember watching them 2 to 3 seasons ago and thinking Devin Vassell is looking so good at getting to his spots in the mid-range. He's using that threat of his shot to get good looks, getting them at good volume, really rising up. And I thought he could be someone he could develop into more of this, Brandon Ingram light player. I was kind of seeing some of that in this game. And he's reversed course since then, becoming almost purely just this 3-point shooter. Look at his shot chart this season. And I'll describe it for those on audio. It's basically a bunch of threes that are above the break. They're not in the corner threes, a lot of above the break threes. And there's a lot less density of shots inside the arc. Not too many at the rim, not too many in the mid-range either. And you're just seeing Devin Vassell basically have more of a 3-point shot, or really more of a 3-point specialist shot diet. That's not something that's going to help your field goal percentage, and it's not indicative of a shot chart of someone who is going to be super helpful in points or efficiency. And now when I watch Devin Vassell the past 1 to 2 seasons, he's just kind of looked more passive in terms of taking the reins on offense. He looks like he's ceding more to Stephon Castle, Dylan Harper, with this season, De'Aaron Fox. He's taking a back seat to these players. And he's not. He's, whether he's not capable, doesn't have the mentality to want to take on more on-ball reps, it's hard to say, and I don't want to dive into the psyche too much. But I think the stats speak for themselves, where Devin Vassell is he's just not getting as clean of looks, not getting all these on-ball reps. Shows up in his scoring usage per Basketball Reference, down to just 18% this season, which is below average. 3-point attempt rate, 63% of his shots are threes this season. That's a split that's telling you, hey, he's a 3-point bomber, not as much a scorer. His assist, down below 10% this season. That is not a total that is going to yield many passing reps or potential for assist. His steals, never above 2%. He's always been more okay there than really impactful there. Devin Vassell hasn't seemed to attack closeout as well and get to the basket. We can see that in his shot chart, but we can also see that in his free throw attempts declining, down to just 2.2 free throw attempts per 100 possessions this season. That's a pretty low volume. That basically means you're getting fouled like once on a shot attempt per game. This is a player that has drifted further and further out, is not seeming like he has the handle or the drive to attack as much and take on these on-ball reps and have these creation responsibilities. And so, I expect the shot in the mid-range and at the free throw line to tick back up, and for Vassell to be more efficient, at least in this role and this responsibility. But I think with the presence of Stephon Castle, Dylan Harper, and De'Aaron Fox, Devin Vassell is going to be hurt by the presence of those players. Again, whether it's to his own ability or whether it's just because he's not as good on ball. And in a way, you think he would thrive with this shot volume off those creators, and I think that's definitely possible. But the idea that Devin Vassell could be a shooting wing, he could do some more and give you more than just threes, and maybe actually, be helpful in those assists as we saw early in his career and give you a little bit of steals, give you a little bit of rebounds. I think that idea has gone away. And Devin Vassell has now more stayed in this role of a 3-point shooter, essentially, which is an okay Dynasty player. That's not a player who is, again, somewhat similar to the Shaedon Sharpe discussion last week. Devin Vassell is not a player who is going to be super helpful across the board. And right now, he's mainly just helping you with those threes per game and kind of leaving you wanting more in the rest of his profile. I think we'll see him I think he can do okay within that role, but I think that's the role we have to project forward for Devin Vassell. And that just isn't as valuable a dynasty role as I envisioned for him even just a few seasons ago. Let's end by finishing up some observations from Toronto Raptors, which was the team I focused on in this week. Honestly, I've been very impressed by them. I thought this would be a mixed match of talent that overlapped too much and didn't fully work and didn't look all too functional. But the Raptors are actually fun to watch this season. I have actually enjoyed watching the Toronto Raptors, which I seriously did not think I was going to say a few months ago. And I mean, they're battling right now in the division towards the top right now. And their odds to win the division per FanDuel as of November 15th are plus 800, which are fourth best. But those are decent odds to win the division. And I think people are taking notice that the Raptors are actually just a decently quality team. Last week, we touched on the intersection of how Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett, Scotty Barnes, and Brandon Ingram are working on offense. Honestly, I came away the most impressed by Emmanuel Quickley, which I didn't think was going to happen. But watching him, Emmanuel Quickley is the one who is generating the most positive shots for this team. His quickness, which, yeah, I'm pun somewhat intentional, right? But seriously, his quickness on the ball, his ability to get downhill and run off screens or handoff actions or off screens, which I said twice, but it's because he does it so often, is really impressive and allows him to get to just positive areas of the court and start exposing the defense. And he's really the only player on the team who is creating exposures within the defense to attack for others. It's helped him in his passing game. It's helping the offense flow smoothly. And really, Emmanuel Quickley is the originator of a lot of positive events on this team. I said in the offseason, I thought Quickley might cede some on-ball reps, but that hasn't really been the case. And I think he's actually doing a great job. I don't want to say leading the offense fully, but initiating a lot of positive offensive actions. And we've seen his shooting take back over the past week, back to nearly 38% from deep, about 46% from the field for Quickley, 6.2 assists per game. Really, I think you're seeing a lot of positive stuff for Emmanuel Quickley. And I think the talent, at least for a solid lead initiator guard, is there. And I'm kind of in on that idea for Emmanuel Quickley. RJ Barrett and Scotty Barnes on offense have been, I think, more opportunistic. Now, RJ Barrett is definitely a predominantly left-hand finisher, which does hinder him, but he also is just a bowling ball attacking the basket. And yeah, I mean, he's still taking some shots from deep, hitting them at an okay rate, making 1.8 threes a game, 33%. Sure, that's acceptable. But he's doing a good job at making sure a lot of his attacks are going at the basket and getting to the basket and building his efficiency that way. Shooting about 50% from the field is pretty positive for RJ Barrett. And while he is running a lot of secondary or second side options for the Raptors offense, that is helping his assists, still maintaining a level of 4 assists per game, which is still pretty nice for RJ Barrett. Even with all the players in the room, he hasn't fallen off in his usage as much as I thought. And that is, I think, a credit to the offense flowing pretty well. The same can be said of Scotty Barnes. Although I think Scotty Barnes doesn't get to a lot of positive areas with his own self-generated shots, kind of a lot of these ugly contested like 10 to 12 mid-range hook shots or jumpers or fadeaways or turnarounds. He's still doing all right with them and making it work. I would like to see that 2-point percentage creep up for Barnes a little bit more from 53%, but his shooting from deep is definitely helping buffer that right now. He's hitting 1.8 threes per game at a 43% clip. I don't know if that 43% from deep will hold, but I think we can see his 2-point percentage tick back up. At least the good news for his deep ball shot is that teams are really daring him to shoot that ball and playing off of him. So Scotty Barnes is getting a lot of clean catch and shoot looks, which is a double-edged sword. It means that he's not really threatening as a shooter. But hey, if he keeps hitting these shots at 43% or even just 38 to 40% from open catch and shoots, teams are going to be forced to guard him more often. And then maybe he can leverage that shot to drive more inside, get better looks. A long way of saying that I think Barnes' self-creation still isn't massively impressing me, but he is doing enough on these attempts where I'm like, okay, all right, you can do a good job of this. But where Barnes has really shined the most for me here is on the defensive end. He is making some crucial off-ball rotations time and time again, meeting defenders, not meeting defenders, rather defending well at the basket and meeting offensive players there for a bunch of highlight reel blocks or just blocks where he comes out of nowhere a couple steps away and swats shots away with authority. Really impressing me jumping passing lanes too, reading the opposing offensive actions and just making stuff happen. I mean, look at these defensive stats for Scottie Barnes. 1.5 steals a game, 1.8 blocks a game. You are going to take that every day. Those are both well above average for any player. Super impactful from Scottie Barnes here. And you see it watching the film. He is impressing on defense with his rotations and truly is doing this sort of 9-cat all-around game that was envisioned of him. You're seeing efficient scoring. You're seeing him pass the ball. You're seeing him get involved on rebounds. You're seeing him get involved on defense. And while at the end of the day, I don't know if Scottie Barnes is going to be amazing in any one of these facets. If you can be above average in all of these facets, that is a extremely impactful fantasy player. And Scottie Barnes has done his job and done what he's supposed to do here in the early going. Of course, Brandon Ingram too. Pretty much doing, I think, what we'd expect of him. The ball does, I don't want to say stops with him in the offense, but it definitely takes a bit of a pause, stops in for a rain check with Brandon Ingram. And you do have that Brandon Ingramization of the offense a little bit, where Ingram likes to work his way into his mid-range and work the ball that way, which is fine. I don't think the offensive flow is the best, but Ingram is pretty good at what he does, and that's pretty much held up so far. Shooting about 49% from the field, 20.5 points per game, some rebounds, some assists, a little bit of defensive stats, good from the line. Yeah, I think Ingram's basically doing what you would want of him and doing it pretty well. I don't think there's any reason for that to tail off. So yeah, I'd say the Raptors core four of Ingram, Barnes, Barrett, and Quickly have done extremely well to date, and I've been pretty impressed with how they work together. The rest of the roster is where I question some of the impact. Jakob Poeltl, we touched on it last week, still kind of dealing with some foul issues, not as many minutes. I mean, I think when he's played, he's done what we could have asked of him. Efficient finishing, getting up shots, getting opportunistic looks at the rim, working well with Quickly in the screen game and the pick and roll game. But yeah, I mean, if the minutes are down, you're not going to get that production. But I think he'll have a role long term to play on this team or wherever he's at. And I don't think there's any true talent top off for Poeltl. It's just more the minutes are down, which is obviously frustrating to dynasty managers. But harking back to the beginning of this pod, I would exhibit some patience with Jakob Poeltl. Colin Murray-Boyles did miss a game or two here and there. It just looks good out there. Much like Scottie Barnes, he is getting ignored when he gets the ball up at the top of the arc. And to Murray-Boyles, he is taking some of these threes. I mean, 2 threes attempted per game, hitting at 50%. You know what, Murray-Boyles? That was better than I think anyone could have at least expected this early on. So continue taking those threes. Continue hitting them until teams guard them. Murray-Boyles has been active on the offensive glass. You can see averaging 2.1 offensive boards a game in his minutes is very impressive. But the two things I haven't liked from him so far is his finishing and somewhat his defensive rebounding and defensive rim protection in general. On the finishing aspect, you can see he's hitting 49% of his twos, which is not really that great considering his size, and you would think he finishes better. The problem is, and I said this in my pre-draft scout report of him, that Colin Murray Boyles is a very left-handed player. That's his dominant hand, and he plays very much with it a lot of the time. And you can see so many times when he has a drive on a player, and yeah, you would think, oh, if you could do anything with your right hand here, this finish would be so much cleaner. And yet he still tries to go up with his left hand. Colin Murray Boyles is not at all comfortable finishing with his right hand or doing too much with his right hand, which means you just are limiting like half the ways you can finish at the basket and your variations. And then to say he can't be an impactful finisher with just the left hand, but it does limit his options, and it's something that he needs to continue to work on. In terms of his rim protection, again, it's not like he's bad, averaging 0.8 steals a game, 0.6 blocks a game, and 3.9 rebounds overall. But he is a little small for a big. Oh, really, he's not a big. He's a little small even for, I would say, a bigger forward. And you can see sometimes where he's just missing that extra like inch or two in contesting a shot at the rim or getting up for that rebound. And he doesn't have the best vertical pop either. Again, I think Murray Boyles will adjust to this and adjust his game because he is talented enough to. But it is just something to note that maybe that's a little limiting very, very long term for like high 30s minutes or mid 30s minutes. Still, I'm impressed with what I've seen from Colin Murray Boyles. I think he's showing everything you would want to from his pre-draft scout, and that sort of ball handling, passing intersection, defense creation. We are seeing those flashes, and we are seeing what he can contribute for Dynasty and for fantasy in a positive manner. I said last week I wanted to hone in on if Jamal Shead's passing was legit or not. He's averaging 5 assists per game in just 18 minutes per game. Honestly, I didn't see anything that stood out as fantastic passing. I think he is a very capable passer. But hey, capable passing will get you a long way. And you do that, you can have a long career as a backup point guard. And so I think Jamal Shead is settling into that. Sandro Mamukelashvili, doing just good offensive big things. Not much more to really say on him. The last thing we'll touch on with the Raptors is that trio of backup wings in Grady Dick, Ochai Agbaji, and Jacoby Walter, who I said I wanted to watch and see. Are they kind of just wings and three-point players, or can they actually do a little bit more? And sadly, I came away disappointed by all three of them. They more seem like good, energetic defenders, will do their responsibilities, will kind of exist out there, will take some open shots, do some interesting things here and there. But ultimately, they weren't really standing out in any of my notes. Weren't really saying, there are signs that these players could emerge further. And really for Dynasty and long term, I'm not seeing anything from Grady Dick, Ochai Agbaji, or Jacoby Walter to say you should go out and invest in this player or think leaps or growths are coming from these players. So I guess we'll leave it on a little bit of a down note here on the Punt Intended podcast. But really, if you haven't watched the Raptors, I stress that you do because it's a little different, I think, than other teams. Their games are really fast, really up-tempo. The Raptors actually, I believe, have one of the quickest paces in the league. They force, if not the most, like the second most turnovers in the league. They have the highest percentage of their plays in transition. They look to run out fast using that quickness and athleticism from players like Barnes and Barrett and Quickly. And they really have been a fun watch. So I stress you go watch them and then see if your opinions match what I'm seeing. I have a feeling I think you'll come away pretty impressed with the Toronto Raptors. Of course, next week, we'll talk about a different team, see what to look out for them. We'll talk about some different risers and fallers. In the meantime, few days, I'll have that Dynasty check-in article coming out, basically deep diving on a handful of players. So be sure to check that out. But otherwise, that'll do it for this episode. And we'll see you next time on the Punt Intended podcast presented by FanDuel.